My name is Luke Rayner. I am 36 years old and a staff sergeant in the United States Army. For the past year, I have lived in the desert, counting days by the hum of helicopters and the sting of sand. Coming home was supposed to mean silence, the kind that feels like peace instead of waiting for the next alarm. I had spent 10 years saving every extra dollar, skipping leave trips, taking double shifts so that one day I could build something that was mine. That something was a small white house tucked between pine trees in North Carolina, the first real place I could call home. I kept it a secret from everyone, even from my wife, Claire, and our son, Eli. I wanted to see their faces when I opened the door and said, "This is ours." I was halfway down Highway 64 when my phone rang. The voice on the other end was my neighbor, a man I barely knew but trusted enough to mow my lawn while I was away. His words came fast, almost afraid. "Sergeant, there are people inside your house. Strangers." I laughed at first. I thought maybe he saw the movers or someone checking the meters. Then he said it again, slower this time. "They've been there all day. Cars in the driveway, balloons, music." My hand tightened on the wheel. I pulled over on the shoulder and opened the security app on my phone. The screen took a second to load, long enough for my pulse to start pounding in my ears. Then the feed came to life, and I saw them. My brother Mark at the center of the living room, holding a glass of wine like a man showing off his kingdom. My parents standing beside him, smiling. My cousins in the background, clapping. The table was covered in food, the kind of meal they never made for me when I was home. Balloons floated against the ceiling. My new floors, still shining, were already scuffed by their shoes. It didn't look like a mistake. It looked like a celebration. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I just stared at the screen, my reflection pale against it. I had spent years earning that house. Every night in the field, every holiday missed, every promise to my son that I would come home soon. And here they were, drinking in the one place that was supposed to be safe. I wanted to call them, to scream, to ask what they thought they were doing. Instead, I sat there, frozen, the hum of passing cars blurring around me. The phone slipped from my hand to the passenger seat. In my chest, something heavy shifted, like a crack running through concrete. I told myself to stay calm, that there had to be a reason, but the longer I watched, the clearer it became. This wasn't confusion, it was claiming. My family had walked into my dream and decided it was theirs. I started the engine again, hands trembling on the wheel. The road ahead looked the same as it always had, but everything else had changed. I wasn't driving home anymore. I was driving toward a war I never wanted to fight. I grew up in a house where silence meant judgment. My parents didn't have to say much. Their faces did the work for them. Mark was always the example, the one they pointed to when they wanted to remind me of how far I had to go. He was the captain of every team, the one who knew how to smile right in photos, the son who made everything look easy. I learned early that my effort didn't count unless it looked good. When I brought home a report card filled with B's, my mother said at least Mark never settled. I stopped trying to impress them after that. I joined the Army at 18, partly out of anger and partly out of escape. I told them I wanted to serve my country, but the truth was I wanted to breathe without feeling small. Basic training was brutal, but it was clean pain, honest pain. No one cared who your brother was. No one kept score except you. The uniform gave me something I'd never had before. Respect. A sense that what I did mattered, even if no one back home noticed. I sent money every month. Sometimes it was for the roof repair, sometimes for my parents' medical bills. They never asked where it came from. They just took it and said Mark had been such a help lately. I didn't correct them. I told myself it didn't matter who got the credit as long as they were safe. But after a while, it did matter. Every deposit started to feel like a piece of myself disappearing into a void. I wondered if they even remembered I existed, or if I was just the quiet one who left. When I re-enlisted, my mother called it running away. Maybe she was right. Every time I came home, I saw the same photos on the wall, Mark's medals, Mark's wedding, Mark's perfect smile. My name was missing from everything that mattered. So I built my life somewhere else. I started saving in secret, stashing away bonuses, tax returns, deployment pay. No one knew. Not my parents, not Mark, not even Claire. The house was my secret rebellion. I told myself it wasn't about revenge, but maybe it was. I wanted something that no one could touch, no one could take credit for. Something that said I existed, and I did something right. When I signed the papers, I remember thinking this was finally mine. Every brick, every board, every quiet corner. For once, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I was going to bring my family home and let the silence speak for itself. By the time I reached the edge of town, the rain had thinned into a mist that clung to the windshield. The air smelled like pine and wet soil, that clean southern scent that always made me think of home. When I turned onto Cedar Hill Drive and saw the house for the first time in person, my chest tightened. It looked even better than the photos. The porch light I had installed remotely was glowing faintly, casting soft gold on the white siding. For a moment, I forgot the noise of the world. I just stood there, hand on the steering wheel, watching my breath fog the glass. This was mine. After years of sleeping in tents and barracks, I finally had a place where the walls wouldn't move. I got out of the car and walked up the path, gravel crunching under my boots. My back ached, my shoulders still carried the stiffness of long travel, but inside I felt something quiet and right. I could already imagine Eli running through the yard, Claire unpacking boxes in the kitchen, the smell of dinner filling the air. The key felt warm in my palm, like it already belonged there. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. Then I heard it. Laughter. Faint at first, just a ripple behind the rain. I froze. The sound grew louder, spilling out through the windows. It was familiar laughter. My brother's voice, my mother's high-pitched laugh, the deep rumble of my father. My hand tightened around the key. I stepped closer and saw shadows moving behind the curtains. Music floated through the air, something upbeat, careless. My stomach dropped. I tried the door and it swung open. The smell of roasted meat and wine hit me like a wave. They were all there. My parents at the table, Mark standing near the fireplace, a plate in his hand. My cousins' faces flushed from drinking. Balloons still tied to the chairs, banners I didn't buy hanging across my walls. For a second, no one noticed me. Then Mark turned, his smile fading when he saw me in the doorway. My mother looked startled, then forced a smile. She said something about how nice it was of me to stop by. My father muttered that we were family, as if that explained everything. I asked them what they were doing. My voice cracked halfway through. Mark shrugged and said it made sense to celebrate the house together, since we were all part of the same family. My mother nodded, like it was obvious. My father told me not to make a scene. I looked around at their faces, their shoes on my floor, their food on my plates. Every trace of pride I had felt a moment before burned away. I wanted to tell them this was mine, every inch of it, but the words stuck in my throat. All I could do was stand there, rain dripping from my jacket, realizing I had finally come home and somehow didn't belong. When the red and blue lights washed across the driveway, the laughter inside went quiet. I watched from the porch as two officers stepped out of their patrol car, rain streaking down their uniforms. Through the window, I could see Mark straighten his shirt, already rehearsing his charm. He opened the door before they even knocked, smiling like he was the one who had called them. "Evening, officers." "What seems to be the problem?" They asked for proof of residence. Mark's tone was smooth, almost amused. He said it was family property, that we had owned it for years, that his brother was just confused. His words slid easily, practiced, like he had been waiting for this moment. My mother stood behind him, nodding, her arms crossed tight. My father hovered near the kitchen, silent but complicit. The officers glanced between them, uncertain. That was when I stepped forward from the porch, folder in hand. The rain had soaked through my jacket, but I didn't feel it. My voice came out steady, low. "This house belongs to me. Every payment, every document, every dollar came from my account." I handed the folder to one of the officers. Inside was the deed, the mortgage agreement, and my military pay statements. He flipped through them slowly, the sound of turning pages louder than the storm outside. Mark's smile faltered for the first time. He tried to recover, claiming he had lent me the down payment. My mother backed him, her voice trembling with rehearsed outrage. My father muttered something about how the family had always shared everything. The officer closed the folder and looked at me. His question was simple: "Do you want them trespassed, sir?" The words hung in the air like a sentence waiting to be spoken. For a moment, I hesitated. I saw my mother's eyes, pleading, and Mark's glare, daring me to fold like I always had. Every memory of being blamed instead of believed flickered through my mind. I thought about the years I had spent trying to earn their respect, the holidays I missed, the money I sent, the silence that followed. Something inside me hardened. I said yes, remove them. The air changed. My mother gasped as if I had struck her. My father called me ungrateful. Mark's voice turned sharp, full of venom. He said I had embarrassed the family, that I had turned my back on blood. The officers moved calmly, asking them to collect their things. My mother called me selfish, her voice cracking. She said I would regret humiliating my own family. I wanted to tell her that humiliation had been my role since childhood, that this was the first time I was standing on even ground. As they stepped outside, Mark's face twisted into something I had never seen before. He whispered that I'd regret this, that family always wins. The officers guided them down the steps, their voices fading into the rain. I stood in the doorway, the folder still clutched in my hand, the house finally silent. It should have felt like victory, but it didn't. It felt like the end of something I had spent my whole life trying to fix. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the blinds, sharp and unwelcome. My phone buzzed nonstop on the nightstand. I thought it was Claire or a message from my unit checking in, but when I unlocked the screen, I saw Mark's face staring back at me. He had posted a photo of himself and our parents in front of my house, the caption dripping with self-pity. Some people forget where they came from once they get a little success. Family should mean sharing, not shutting the door. Within hours, the post had hundreds of comments. Old neighbors chimed in first. "I can't believe Luke did that. How could he do that to his family?" Distant cousins followed. Must have gone to his head after the army. Even people I hadn't spoken to in years shared it, shaking their heads at the ungrateful soldier who threw out his parents. Every sentence felt like a blow I couldn't block. I scrolled through them one by one until the words started to blur. The house around me was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every heartbeat. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the same folder of documents beside it. One by one, I took screenshots of everything. Every comment, every post, every lie he told. I organized them into folders like evidence for a war that no one else could see. I wasn't sure yet what I would do with it all, but I needed proof. I needed to hold onto something real before the story completely slipped out of my hands. The glow of the screen painted my reflection in blue light. I barely recognized myself. The phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. Her voice on the voicemail was cold, clipped. "You made a fool of this family. Do you understand what you've done?" Not once did she ask why they broke in or how it felt to find strangers in my own house. It was always about appearances, always about protecting Mark. I deleted the message without listening to the rest. As the day went on, more notifications poured in. Friends from the service texted me links, asking if it was true. Some said to ignore it. Others told me to fight back. I stared at the screen and thought about what loyalty really meant. I had spent half my life being loyal to people who couldn't see me, who only reached for me when they needed something. Now they had turned that loyalty into a weapon. That night, I printed the paperwork for a legal claim. Ownership records, trespassing reports, online defamation guidelines. The pages spread across the dining table like a map of battle plans. My hands shook as I signed the first form, but not from fear. It was something closer to resolve. I realized blood only matters when it carries truth. Without that, it's just red ink on paper. I looked around the quiet room, at the walls I had built, and whispered to no one, "I'm done being silent." The courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and old paper. The air was heavy with whispers that stopped the moment the judge entered. I sat behind the plaintiff's table, the folder of documents resting in front of me, every page worn from being handled too many times. Across the aisle, Mark looked calm, almost smug, dressed in a suit that probably wasn't his. My parents sat behind him, avoiding my eyes. It was strange seeing the people who raised me sitting on the wrong side of the room. Mark's lawyer stood first. He spoke smoothly, confident. He said the property had always been family land, purchased through shared funds and managed by his client's generosity. He painted me as a stubborn son who misunderstood the meaning of family. I sat still, listening, letting the words roll over me. When it was my turn, I stood and walked to the stand, every step feeling heavier than the last. I handed the clerk the mortgage documents, the bank statements, the loan approvals. The judge flipped through them quietly. Then I asked permission to play the security footage. The courtroom lights dimmed as the video filled the screen. There was Mark in my living room, raising a glass, laughter echoing behind him. My parents smiling, my floors covered in their footprints. The room stayed silent except for the sound of the recording. When it ended, the air felt thinner, like everyone was holding their breath. The lawyer tried to dismiss it as a misunderstanding, a simple family celebration. I didn't argue. I just reached into my jacket and pulled out my phone. The clerk plugged it into the speakers, and the audio played. My father's voice came first, calm and deliberate, telling me to sign half the property over. Then my mother's threat followed, her tone cold. Mark's voice cut through them both, saying I would regret turning against them. Each word echoed through the courtroom until it faded into silence. I didn't look at them. I just waited. The judge's face was unreadable as he shuffled through the papers again. The sound of the gavel tapping once broke the stillness. Everyone in the room seemed to exhale at once. The judge said he had heard enough. His decision would follow shortly. For a moment, all I could hear was my own heartbeat, steady and loud, filling the space where their voices used to live. When the judge returned, the sound of his shoes against the tile echoed through the courtroom. Everyone rose, then sat again in unison. His expression was calm, almost unreadable. He read through his notes for what felt like forever, his voice steady, deliberate. Then he looked up. The property at Cedar Hill Drive is the sole and lawful possession of Luke Rayner. All claims to the contrary are dismissed. The words landed like a final shot fired after a long war. For a second, no one moved. My hands rested on the table, fingers locked tight. Relief came first, then something heavier, almost grief. Across the aisle, Mark's jaw clenched. He didn't look at me. My mother's eyes were wet but hard. My father kept staring straight ahead, face stiff with pride and denial. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs, but I barely heard them. The verdict wasn't just about the house. It was about the years I spent unseen, the moments I swallowed anger to keep peace, the silence that had cost me so much. When the gavel struck, it sounded final. I gathered my folder and stood. My legs felt light, like I had walked out of a storm into clear air. As I turned toward the exit, Mark muttered something under his breath, but I didn't stop. Outside, the afternoon sun hit my face, warm and blinding. I took a deep breath and felt it settle in my chest like the first real one in years. The courthouse doors closed behind me with a heavy click. I looked up at the sky, blue and sharp against the marble steps. I thought I would feel proud, but what I felt was something quieter. Freedom, maybe, or just the absence of weight. The house was mine, but the victory had carved something out of me. Family had always been a battlefield. I had just stopped fighting on their side. As I walked toward my truck, the folder tucked under my arm, I realized I hadn't lost them that day. I had finally stopped losing myself. The first night back in the house felt strange. The walls were bare, the air still smelled faintly of dust and fresh paint. But the silence was different now. It wasn't heavy or hollow. It was clean, like a wound finally beginning to close. I walked through each room slowly, running my hand along the walls, remembering what they looked like filled with people who didn't belong here. Every trace of them was gone. No voices, no footsteps, just space. The floor creaked under my boots as I reached the kitchen. A single box sat on the counter, the last thing left to unpack. Inside were a few old photographs, a folded flag from my service, and the candle I had kept from deployment. I placed it in the center of the table and struck a match. The small flame flickered, throwing soft gold light across the room. For the first time, the quiet didn't make me tense. It made me feel grounded, as if the house had finally exhaled. A few days later, my parents came by. I heard their car before I saw them. They stood at the edge of the driveway, unsure if they should come closer. My mother's voice was tight when she spoke. She said I had brought shame to the family, that people were talking, that my brother wouldn't show his face in town. My father stood beside her, hands in his pockets, eyes on the ground. I listened without interrupting. When she finally stopped, I told her the truth doesn't shame anyone unless their life is built on lies. The words came out calm, almost gentle. She didn't respond. She just turned away, and they left without looking back. After the car disappeared, I sat on the porch and watched the trees move in the wind. The air smelled like rain again. I thought about how many years I had spent chasing their approval, believing that love had to be earned. It took losing them to understand that love built on fear isn't love at all, it's control. I had mistaken loyalty for belonging. Now I finally understood the difference. That night, I walked through the house again. Every step echoed, but instead of loneliness, it sounded like ownership. The candle still burned on the kitchen table, the wax pooling slowly. I pulled out my phone and took a photo, not to post or prove anything, but to remember this feeling. Peace doesn't always come with applause. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in an empty house, when no one's watching. Before turning in, I stood by the window and looked out at the road. The streetlights glowed faintly, the same way they did the night I first came home. I thought about Claire and Eli, about bringing them here soon, about starting over without ghosts in the walls. Then I looked straight into the camera and said what I wish someone had told me years ago. If you've ever had to choose between truth and comfort, pick truth. It will hurt, but it will set you free. Family isn't who shares your blood. It's who stands beside you when the world goes quiet. I blew out the candle, and the darkness felt like peace.